The cobblestones outside Eldermore Palace gleamed wet from the morning rain, but Captain Marcus Kane barely noticed as he made his rounds. 20 years of loyal service had taught him to see everything, every shadow, every threat, every soul who didn't belong. But when he turned the corner by the servants' gate, his blood turned to ice. There, huddled against the cold stone wall, a woman in tattered clothes fed mouldy bread to 2 small children. Her face was gaunt, her hands trembling, but those eyes, those emerald eyes he'd kissed goodbye 5 years ago before the fire claimed his family. "Elena," he whispered, his sword hand shaking for the first time in decades. She looked up, terror flashing across her features. The children pressed closer to her side, their faces mirrors of his own. Marcus had buried empty coffins. He'd mourned them. He'd nearly taken his own life from the grief. Now they sat before him, alive but broken, eating scraps like common beggars. But why had Elena let him believe they were dead? What was she running from that was worse than him thinking his family was gone forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment stretched between them like a taut bowstring. Elena's lips parted, but no sound emerged. The younger child, a girl with Marcus's dark hair and Elena's delicate features, tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama, who is the soldier man?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. His daughter, his little Rosalie, who had been barely 3 when he'd last seen her, didn't recognize him. The boy beside her, Thomas, had grown tall and lean, maybe 8 years old now. His intelligent eyes studied Marcus with wariness born from too many hard lessons. "Children," Elena whispered, her voice hoarse from years of hiding. "Go around the corner, find somewhere warm." "But Mama," Rosalie protested. "Now." The sharpness in Elena's tone sent both children scrambling away, though Marcus noticed Thomas lingered just out of sight, protective of his mother and sister. Marcus stepped closer, his ceremonial armor clanking softly against the morning stillness. 5 years, he said, his voice barely controlled. 5 years I've visited your graves every month. 5 years I've blamed myself for not being there to save you. Elena pushed herself up against the wall, her body rigid with fear. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and Marcus could count her ribs beneath the threadbare fabric of her dress. Whatever she'd been running from had cost her everything. "You shouldn't have found us," she breathed. "Marcus, you have to pretend you never saw us. Please, pretend." The word exploded from him louder than he intended. He glanced around quickly, ensuring they remained alone. "Pretend my wife and children aren't alive. Pretend they aren't starving in the streets while I sleep in warm quarters 50 feet away." Yes, her emerald eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. "Because if you don't, we'll all be dead by morning, truly dead this time." Marcus studied her face, reading the lines of exhaustion and constant fear etched there. In their 7 years of marriage, he'd never known Elena to frighten easily. She'd sewn his wounds after battles, faced down angry merchants who tried to cheat them, even stood up to his commanding officers when they'd demanded too much of his time. This terror was something else entirely. "Who are you running from?" he asked quietly. Elena shook her head violently. "The less you know, the safer you'll be. I'm captain of the Royal Guard, Elena. I'm sworn to protect this kingdom and everyone in it. That includes you." "No." A voice cracked. "Your oath is exactly why you can't help us." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed off the palace walls. Elena's face went white as parchment. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, but Marcus recognized the heavy tread immediately. "Captain Kane?" Lieutenant Harrison's voice carried around the corner. "Sir, the king requests your immediate presence in the throne room." Marcus glanced back at Elena, who had somehow made herself nearly invisible against the stone wall. Years of practice, he realized. She'd become a ghost by necessity. "I'll be right there, Lieutenant," Marcus called back, never taking his eyes off his wife. "Understood, sir." He seemed urgent about the matter. The footsteps retreated, but Marcus knew he had moments before someone else came looking. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small leather pouch, pressing it into Elena's cold hands. "There's enough gold there for food and lodging for a week," he whispered. "The Crimson Swan Inn, 2 streets over. Tell them Captain Kane sent you." "Marcus, you don't understand." "Tonight," he interrupted, "after the evening watch changes. Meet me at the old oak behind the stables. We're going to fix this." Elena's fingers closed around the pouch, but her expression remained haunted. "Some things can't be fixed." "Watch me," Marcus said, and strode away toward his duty, his mind already racing with questions that demanded answers and a growing certainty that his family's false death was connected to something that threatened the very crown he'd sworn to protect. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as Marcus stood at attention before King Aldric's throne. Sleep had eluded him entirely after his encounter at the gates, and exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders like ill-fitting armor. Yet he maintained his rigid posture, years of military discipline overriding the chaos churning in his mind. "Captain," the king's voice echoed through the vaulted chamber, "I trust the night watch proceeded without incident?" Marcus's throat constricted. Behind the king's shoulder, Lord Chancellor Voss watched him with those pale, calculating eyes that seemed to pierce straight through to his thoughts. "Yes, Your Majesty. All quiet on the perimeter." The lie tasted bitter as ash. He forced himself to meet the king's gaze, even as Ilara's face haunted his peripheral vision. Those hollow cheeks, the way she'd flinched when he'd moved too quickly, as if expecting a blow. His Ilara, who had once laughed freely and faced down charging horses without fear. "Excellent. We have much to discuss regarding the Northland territories. Lord Voss has received disturbing reports of rebellion brewing in the outer provinces." King Aldric leaned forward, his crown catching the light streaming through stained glass windows. "We may need to dispatch additional forces within the fortnight." Marcus nodded mechanically, but his mind wandered to small hands clutching at torn fabric, to children's eyes that held too much knowledge of hunger and hardship. Thomas would be nearly 10 now, old enough to understand their circumstances. And little Lydia, she'd been barely walking when the fever took them, or when he thought it had taken them. "Captain Thorne, you seem distracted." Voss's silky voice cut through his reverie like a blade. "Perhaps the weight of command grows burdensome?" There was something in the Chancellor's tone that set every nerve on edge. Marcus straightened further, meeting Voss's stare directly. "Not at all, my lord. Merely considering the strategic implications of the northern situation." "Of course." Voss's thin lips curved in what might charitably be called a smile. "Your dedication to duty has always been exemplary. Even in the face of personal tragedy, you've never wavered in service to the crown." The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus's jaw clenched involuntarily as memories surfaced. The night he'd returned from campaign to find his home empty, ash-stained, the neighbors' sympathetic whispers about the plague that had swept through the lower quarters, how Voss himself had delivered the news, had placed a consoling hand on his shoulder while explaining that the bodies had been burned quickly to prevent further contagion, bodies that apparently had never existed. "Your loyalty will be rewarded, Captain," the king continued, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, "which is why I'm entrusting you with a delicate matter. There have been reports of suspicious individuals gathering near the palace grounds, beggars and vagrants who may be more than they appear." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "Suspicious how, Your Majesty?" "Refugees from the northern provinces, mostly. But our intelligence suggests some may be spies, or worse, supporters of the Pretender's cause." The king's expression hardened. "I want them cleared out, tonight. Use whatever force necessary to ensure they understand the capital has no tolerance for sedition. The children as well?" The question escaped before Marcus could stop it. Voss's eyes sharpened. "Children can be the most effective spies, Captain. Their innocence is often assumed rather than verified. Surely your military experience has taught you that enemies wear many faces. Indeed, Marcus managed. His hands remained steady at his sides through sheer force of will, even as his world tilted on its axis. They knew. Somehow they knew about Ilara and the children, and this was a test, or a trap. "You have your orders," the king declared with finality. "Report back at dawn, with confirmation that the matter has been resolved." Marcus bowed deeply. "It will be done, your majesty." As he turned to leave, Voss's voice followed him. "Captain, do remember that oath you swore when accepting your commission. Crown above all else, duty before blood, service unto death. Beautiful words, are they not?" "Beautiful indeed, my lord." Marcus didn't trust himself to say more. He strode from the throne room with measured steps, nodding to the guards at their posts, maintaining the facade of a loyal officer proceeding about routine business. But beneath the surface, his mind raced through possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. By nightfall, he would be expected to drive away, or worse, the woman he'd mourned for 3 years, and the children he'd believed dead, the family he'd dreamed of holding again through countless lonely nights. And if he refused, if he showed even a moment's hesitation, Voss would have all the evidence needed to brand him a traitor. Crown above all else. The words echoed mockingly as Marcus descended into the palace's lower levels, seeking the armory and the solitude to think. But time was running short, and every choice before him led toward betrayal of one kind or another. The worn cobblestones felt alien beneath Marcus's feet as he followed Elena through the maze of narrow alleys that twisted away from the palace district. Each step took him further from the gleaming walls he had sworn to protect, deeper into a world of shadow and desperation he had forgotten existed. Elena moved with practiced silence, her threadbare cloak pulled low over her head. Behind her, Thomas clutched little Mira's hand, the boy's eyes darting nervously between his father and the darkened doorways they passed. Marcus's heart clenched at how thin his son had become, how the child flinched at every unexpected sound. "Here," Elena whispered, stopping before a building that leaned so precariously it seemed held upright only by the structures pressed against it. She pushed open a door that hung crooked on rusted hinges, releasing the smell of damp wood and unwashed bodies. The room beyond was barely larger than Marcus's quarters in the palace, but it housed a dozen souls. Huddled forms stirred in the corners, women clutching sleeping infants, an old man whose cough rattled like stones in a jar, children who stared with hollow eyes that had seen too much. Elena led them past these silent watchers to a space near the back wall where a few threadbare blankets marked their territory. "Mama's back," Mira whispered, settling onto the thin fabric with the resignation of one who knew no other comfort. Marcus remained standing, his soldier's bearing making him feel enormous in the cramped space. The ornate sword at his hip caught what little light filtered through the cracked window, and he saw how the other residents eyed it with a mixture of hunger and fear. "You've been living like this for 3 years?" The words emerged rougher than he intended. Elena knelt beside their makeshift bedding, her movements efficient despite their poverty. "We've been alive for 3 years. That's what matters. But I mourned you. I buried empty caskets. The entire court attended your funeral." Marcus's voice cracked. "Why didn't you come to me?" Elena's hands stilled on the blanket she was smoothing. In the dim light, Marcus could see the weight of secrets in the line of her shoulders, the careful way she avoided meeting his eyes. "Because they wanted us dead, Marcus, and if they discovered we lived—" She finally looked up, and he saw tears balanced on her lower lashes. "They still want us dead." "Who? Who wants you dead?" Marcus knelt beside her, lowering his voice when he noticed the other residents listening. "Elena, tell me what happened that night." She glanced toward Thomas, who was settling Mira against his shoulder with the tenderness of a child forced to grow up too quickly. "Not here. Not with them listening." The old man's cough erupted again, and Elena moved without hesitation to help him sit up, offering him water from a cracked clay cup. Marcus watched his wife's gentle ministrations, saw how the other inhabitants looked to her with trust and affection. She had found purpose, even in this place of desperation. "You've made yourself their healer," he observed. "Someone has to care for them. The palace physicians certainly won't venture into the lower city." There was no accusation in her tone, but Marcus felt the weight of it nonetheless. A commotion outside made everyone freeze. Heavy footsteps echoed off the alley walls, accompanied by the distinctive jingle of mail armor. Palace guards. Elena's face went white. "They're searching for us." "You? How could they know?" Marcus stopped. His absence from the evening watch would have been noticed. Questions would be asked. "I led them here." The footsteps grew louder. Elena grabbed Thomas and Mira, pulling them toward a narrow gap behind a pile of rotting crates. The other residents melted into shadows with the practiced ease of people accustomed to hiding from authority. "Captain Marcus?" The voice belonged to Sergeant Willem, one of his most trusted men. "We know you're in there." Marcus looked at his family crouched in their hiding place, then at the sword that marked him as the crown's man. The weight of his oath pressed down on him like a physical thing, but the sight of his children's terrified faces made the choice for him. He moved to the broken window and called out, "There's nothing here, Willem. Move on." A pause. "Sir, are you well? You missed the evening briefing. I'm conducting my own investigation. Return to your duties." Another long pause, then the sound of retreating footsteps. Marcus released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, but when he turned back, Elena was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "You just lied to your own men," she said quietly. "I protected my family. And when they discover the truth, when they realize Captain Marcus has been harboring the kingdom's greatest threat..." Elena's voice carried a bitter edge. "What then?" Marcus stared at her, the full implications of her words settling over him like a shroud. "What aren't you telling me, Elena?" She pulled their children closer, and in her eyes he saw the reflection of a terrible knowledge. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped steadily from the eaves of the abandoned stable where Marcus had brought his family. Elena sat in the corner, her arms wrapped protectively around their children while he paced the small space like a caged wolf. The silence between them stretched taut as a bowstring. "You have to tell me what happened," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "The funeral, I buried empty coffins, didn't I?" Elena's eyes remained fixed on the straw-covered floor. "Yes. Who helped you? Who else knows you're alive?" "Does it matter?" She looked up then, and he saw something in her gaze that made his chest tighten. Fear, yes, but something else. Something that looked almost like pity. "You can't protect us, Marcus. You never could." The words hit him like a physical blow. "I'm captain of the Royal Guard. There's nothing in this kingdom I can't..." "Stop!" Elena's voice cracked like a whip. Little Tam stirred in her arms and she gentled her tone. "Please, just stop pretending that your precious crown can solve everything." Marcus knelt before her, reaching out to touch her face. She flinched away, and the rejection cut deeper than any blade. "Elena, whatever happened, whatever you're running from, we can find another way. I have resources, connections. The king trusts me." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "The king." She shifted Tam to one arm and reached into the tattered folds of her dress. Her fingers emerged, clutching something that caught the dim light filtering through the broken roof. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. The pendant hanging from Elena's trembling hand was unmistakable. A silver star surrounded by ancient runes, suspended from a chain of white gold. He had seen its twin only once before, around the neck of King Aldrich himself during the most sacred ceremonies. "Where did you get that?" The words came out strangled. "It was my mother's." Elena's voice was steady now, resigned. "And her mother's before that, passed down through 20 generations of daughters who were told never to speak of it, never to show it, never to claim what it represents." Marcus stared at the pendant, his mind reeling. The royal bloodline had been carefully documented for centuries. King Aldrich was the last of his house, with no living relatives. It was why the question of succession had become so urgent, why the king had been pressured to remarry after his first wife died childless. That's impossible, he breathed. Is it? Elena's eyes blazed. Did you never wonder why my family lived so far from the capital? Why we had money but no apparent source of it? Why my father forbade me from ever visiting the palace, even after I married the captain of the Royal Guard? The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Elena's refined mannerisms that seemed at odds with her humble background, her education, far superior to most merchants' daughters, the way she had always changed the subject when he asked about her childhood. You're the rightful heir to the throne, she said it simply, without pride or ambition. Or my children are, which amounts to the same thing. Rose shifted in her mother's arms, mumbling something in her sleep. Marcus looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and felt his world crumble. The shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw. How had he never seen the resemblance to the royal portraits that lined the palace halls? Someone found out, he said. Elena nodded. Lord Garrett. He came to our house while you were away on campaign. At first I thought he was there to kill us. She touched the pendant again, protective, but he had another proposal. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Lord Garrett, the king's most trusted adviser, the man who had stood beside him at Elena's funeral, offering comfort and counsel, the man who had been pushing so hard for the king to name an heir from among the noble houses. What did he want? Proof that we were dead. Real proof. Elena's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He said if we disappeared quietly, permanently, he would ensure that you rose even higher in the king's favor. Captain today, perhaps Lord Commander tomorrow. All we had to do was vanish and never return. And if you refused, then we would die anyway, but you would die with us. Tears traced silver paths down Elena's dirt-stained cheeks. He gave me 3 days to decide. So I took the children and ran. I made it look like bandits had attacked while you were away. I thought if you believed we were dead, you would be safe, and we could start over somewhere far from here. Marcus felt sick. All these months, Garrett had been playing him like a puppet, using his grief to bind him closer to the crown. Every promotion, every sign of the king's favor, all of it built on the lie of his family's death. Why didn't you keep running? He asked. Why come back to the capital? Elena's hand moved to her throat, and Marcus noticed how thin she had become, how hollow her cheeks were. Because, she whispered, Lord Garrett found us anyway. The abandoned watchtower stood like a broken tooth against the dawn sky, its crumbling stones weathered by decades of neglect. Marcus had chosen this place carefully, far enough from the palace to avoid patrol routes, yet close enough that he could return before his absence raised questions. His heart hammered against his ribs as he waited, every shadow potentially concealing danger. When Elara emerged from the morning mist with the children trailing behind her, Marcus felt his breath catch. In daylight, away from the chaos of the marketplace, the changes in his family struck him with renewed force. Thomas had grown tall and lean, his boyish features sharpening into the angular promise of manhood. Little Sarah clung to her mother's tattered skirts, her once bright eyes now holding a wariness that no 6-year-old should possess. But it was Elara who commanded his attention. The woman he'd married had been gentle, soft-spoken, content to tend their small garden and sing lullabies to their babies. This woman moved with predatory grace, her gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. When she looked at him, he saw steel where there had once been warmth. "You came," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Did you think I wouldn't?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The Marcus I knew would have, but people change, especially when they serve tyrants. The word hit him like a physical blow. "Elara, no." She raised her hand. "Let me speak first. There are things you need to understand before you decide what to do with us." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his parents. Sarah pressed closer to her mother, thumb creeping toward her mouth before Elara gently pulled it away. "The night of the fire," Elara began. "We didn't escape by chance. I'd been warned, told to be ready, to have the children prepared to run at a moment's notice. Marcus frowned. Warned by whom? Someone who knew what King Aldric planned for the families of his guard. Someone who understood that dead men tell no tales, but neither do their widows and orphans. The implications of her words sank in slowly, like poison seeping through his veins. That's impossible. The attack was by rebel forces. Everyone knows what they were told. Elara's eyes blazed with an inner fire he'd never seen before. The rebels were convenient scapegoats for a massacre that eliminated inconvenient witnesses. Witnesses to what? Elara glanced at the children, then back at Marcus. Thomas, take your sister and gather some of those berries near the tower base. Stay where I can see you, but give us room to talk. The boy nodded, understanding passing between mother and son that spoke of hard-won survival instincts. When they were alone, Elara continued, You were part of King Aldric's inner guard. You saw things, heard conversations. Did you never wonder why certain nobles disappeared? Why trade agreements were signed with kingdoms we'd never contacted before? Why the royal treasury grew fat while common folk starved? Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The king's business isn't mine to question. Perhaps not then. But you have eyes, Marcus. You've always been observant. Think about the patterns. Against his will, memories surfaced. Lord Garrett, who'd questioned the wisdom of increased taxation, found dead in his chambers supposedly from a weak heart. The mysterious midnight meetings with hooded figures, the way certain documents were locked away after Marcus and his fellow guards had witnessed their delivery. Even if what you're suggesting is true, he said carefully, what does it have to do with the attack on our village? Some of the guards were beginning to ask questions. Your captain, Willem, he'd started keeping his own records, comparing official reports with what he'd witnessed personally. He shared his concerns with trusted men. Marcus remembered Willem's furrowed brow during those final weeks, the way he'd grown quiet and watchful. Willem died in the attack. Willem and every guard who might have posed a threat to the king's secrets, except you were away on that convoy duty. A fortunate coincidence, don't you think? The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. The mission that had taken him away from his family, supposedly urgent but ultimately meaningless. His survival when so many others had perished. His rapid promotion upon his return. I was bait, he whispered. You were leverage. A man whose family died in a rebel attack, whose loyalty would be absolute because you had nothing left but your service to the crown. King Aldric didn't just spare you. He created you. Marcus staggered backward, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword before dropping to his side. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd fought for, built his new life upon. All of it rested on a foundation of lies and blood. How do you know all this? He asked. Elara's expression grew guarded. Because the person who warned me, who helped us escape and stay hidden all these years, was Willem himself. And before he died, he entrusted me with his evidence. The morning air suddenly felt thin, insufficient. Marcus stared at his wife, his living, breathing wife, and realized that saving his family might mean destroying everything else he thought he knew. The tavern's back room reeked of ale and desperation. Marcus pressed his back against the rough wooden wall, watching Elara pace before the single guttering candle. Their children slept fitfully on a pile of moth-eaten blankets in the corner, finally clean and fed, after Marcus had emptied his coin purse at the market. You have to tell me what happened, Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse from the strain of keeping quiet. The fire! I saw the bodies. I buried you myself. Elara's laugh was bitter, hollow. You buried strangers, vagrants who died in our place. She turned to face him, and in the flickering light, he could see the weight of 3 years etched into every line of her face. The same night you left for the northern campaign, they came for us. Who came for you? The king's men. Not soldiers, the other kind, the ones who work in shadow. Her fingers traced the pendant at her throat, a gesture Marcus recognized from their early marriage when she was nervous. But this wasn't the simple silver cross she used to wear. This was something else entirely. Dark metal twisted into shapes that seemed to shift in the candlelight. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "What did you do, Ilara?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "You remember my grandmother's stories? The ones about the old bloodlines, the families who could touch the veil between worlds? Children's tales, not tales." She lifted the pendant, and Marcus saw now that it wasn't reflecting the candlelight. It was generating its own luminescence, a sickly green glow that made his skin crawl. "My grandmother wasn't just a storyteller, Marcus. She was a guardian, and when she died, the responsibility passed to me." The room suddenly felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Marcus found himself reaching for his sword before he caught himself. Responsibility for what? For keeping the barriers strong, for ensuring that what lies beyond the veil stays there. Ilara's eyes met his, and he saw fear there, not of him, but of something far worse. But 3 years ago, someone began trying to weaken those barriers, someone with power, with resources, someone close to the throne. Marcus thought of the strange reports that had filtered back from the capital while he was campaigning in the north. Livestock found drained of blood, wells running dry overnight, children waking from nightmares, speaking in languages no scholar could identify. "The king's advisors," he said slowly. "Lord Aldrich and his circle. Lord Aldrich is a puppet. The real threat sits much higher." Ilara moved to the small window, peering through the grimy glass at the palace towers visible in the distance. "Your king has been dead for 6 months, Marcus. What sits on the throne now is something else, something that crawled through from the other side." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought of his last audience with King Aldwin, how the monarch's eyes had seemed wrong somehow, too bright, too knowing, how the man who had once treated Marcus like a son had spoken to him as if he were a stranger. "That's impossible. I've served him faithfully." "You've served faithfully. The question is what you've been serving." Ilara turned back to him, and now he could see the pendant's glow reflected in her pupils. "The night they came for us, I had just completed a ritual that would have sealed the main breach point. But I was too late. Something had already come through, something powerful enough to take the king's form, his memories, his mannerisms." Marcus sank into the room's single chair, his mind reeling. "Why didn't you come to me? Why let me think you were dead?" "Because I knew you'd choose duty over family. You always do." The words stung because they held truth, and because I needed time to learn, to grow stronger. The Guardian's power doesn't manifest overnight, especially not when you're running for your life with 2 children. She knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. Her skin was fever-warm, and he could feel something electric passing between them, not desire but raw power. "I can prove it to you," she whispered. "But once you see, there's no going back. You'll know what I know, carry what I carry. Your oath to the crown will become meaningless because there will be no crown left to serve, only a shell wearing its shape." Marcus looked at his sleeping children, then at the woman he'd loved since they were barely more than children themselves. 3 years of grief had carved him hollow, and now she was offering to fill that emptiness with a burden that might destroy them all. But the alternative was returning to the palace, to serving something that might have murdered the man he'd sworn to protect. "Show me," he said. Ilara smiled, but there was no joy in it, only grim determination. "Close your eyes, my love, and remember, some truths can never be forgotten." The abandoned watchtower stood like a broken tooth against the dawn sky, its stones weathered by decades of neglect. Marcus led Ilara and the children through the crumbling doorway, his hand never leaving his sword hilt, despite the apparent safety of their refuge. The circular chamber within smelled of moss and old rain, but thick walls would muffle their voices and hide them from prying eyes. Ilara settled the children in a corner where ancient straw still provided some cushioning. Little Thomas had fallen asleep during their hurried journey through the city's back alleys, while Mira clutched her makeshift doll with wide, watchful eyes. The girl had her mother's intelligence, Marcus noticed. She understood more than she let on. "Now," Marcus said, turning to face his wife, Tell me what happened that night. Tell me why I buried empty graves while you lived in shadows." Ilara's hands trembled as she pulled her tattered cloak closer. In the pale morning light filtering through the cracked windows, she looked older than her years, marked by hardships he couldn't imagine. But beneath the grime and exhaustion, he could still see the woman he'd fallen in love with, the merchant's daughter, who'd laughed at his clumsy attempts at courtship. "Do you remember," she began softly, "how I would sometimes wake with visions, dreams that felt more real than waking?" Marcus nodded. He'd dismissed them as nighttime fancies, the product of an active imagination. Many times he'd held her as she wept from particularly vivid dreams, stroking her hair until she calmed. They weren't dreams, Marcus. They were glimpses of what could be, what might happen. The old blood runs in my family's line. My grandmother had the same gift, though she hid it well. Ilara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 3 days before the fire, I saw it all. A house burning, screams in the night, soldiers with torches. Soldiers? Marcus stepped closer, his warrior's instincts sharpening. What soldiers? The fire was an accident, a candle left burning too close to the curtains. Ilara's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Is that what they told you? Oh, my love, you always believe the best of everyone, especially those you served." She reached into her cloak and withdrew something wrapped in grimy cloth. With careful fingers, she revealed a small pendant, silver worked with symbols Marcus didn't recognize, but which made his skin prickle with unease. "This belonged to my great-grandmother. It's been passed down through the women of my line for 7 generations. Do you know what these markings mean?" Marcus shook his head, though something deep in his memory stirred uncomfortably. "They mark the bloodline of the old kings, the rightful kings, from before the conquest." Ilara's eyes met his, and he saw pain there, but also something harder. King Aldric's grandfather didn't just defeat the previous dynasty, Marcus. He hunted them down, every last one. Man, woman, and child, or so he thought. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered backward, one hand against the stone wall for support. "No, that's... You're a merchant's daughter. Your father sold grain and—" "My adoptive father sold grain," Ilara corrected gently. "The man who raised me after my real parents died, hiding their true identity. He knew what I was, Marcus. And when my visions began to strengthen, when I started seeing not just fragments but entire futures, he knew it was only a matter of time before others noticed. The night of the fire, I saw them coming. Royal Guards, hand-picked by someone who'd discovered my heritage. They were ordered to burn us out and make it look accidental. No questions, no trial, no chance for word to spread that the old bloodline survived." Ilara's voice grew stronger, more certain. "I had perhaps an hour's warning. I took the children through the cellar passage. You never knew about it, did you? Father had it dug when he first took me in, just in case." Marcus remembered that night with painful clarity. He'd been on duty at the palace, discussing security arrangements for a visiting dignitary. By the time the alarm bells rang and he raced through the streets to his home, nothing remained but smouldering ruins and charred beams. They'd told him the bodies were too badly burned to recover, that the intense heat had consumed everything. "I watched from the shadows as you knelt in the ashes," Ilara continued, tears streaming down her face. "Do you think it didn't tear my heart apart to let you suffer? But I couldn't risk exposing us. As long as the king believes the bloodline ended, my children have a chance at life. But why reveal yourself now? Why take such a risk?" Ilara's expression grew haunted, because the visions have been getting stronger, and they all show the same thing, a great darkness coming to the kingdom, something that will destroy everything we know, and in every vision where the realm survives. She paused, meeting his eyes with desperate intensity. "In every one, you're standing beside me when it happens." The abandoned watchtower stood like a broken tooth against the storm-darkened sky, its crumbling stones slick with rain. Marcus led his family up the treacherous spiral staircase, each step echoing hollowly in the narrow space. Elena's breathing was labored, and young Thomas whimpered with each gust of wind that howled through the gaps in the ancient walls. Just a little further, Marcus whispered, though doubt gnawed at him. This place offered shelter, but it was temporary at best. By dawn, the King's Guard would expand their search beyond the city walls. They reached what remained of the tower's upper chamber. Half the roof had collapsed years ago, but the intact portion provided some protection from the elements. Marcus spread his cloak on the drier stones, helping Elena settle the children. "Papa, I'm scared," Lily whispered, pressing close to his side. Her small hand found his, fingers cold as winter morning. "I know, little star." The old endearment came naturally, though it tasted bitter now. Everything had changed, yet his love for them remained constant as the northern star. "We're safe here for tonight." Elena watched him with those knowing eyes that had haunted his dreams. Even in their dire circumstances, even hollow-cheeked and wearing beggar's rags, she possessed an otherworldly grace that made his chest tighten with longing and regret. "You're wondering how long you can keep running," she said quietly, settling Thomas against her shoulder as he finally succumbed to exhausted sleep. Marcus nodded, unable to voice the truth. His entire life had been built on duty, honor, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. Now he was a traitor, having chosen love over oath. The weight of it pressed down on him like the stones of this crumbling tower. "Tell me about the secret you carry," he said. "Help me understand why the king wants you dead so desperately that he'd murder children." Elena's face went pale in the dim light filtering through the broken roof. She glanced down at their sleeping son, then at Lily, who dozed fitfully against Marcus's side. "Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud." "More dangerous than our current situation?" Marcus kept his voice low but couldn't hide his frustration. "Elena, I've thrown away everything I've ever worked for. My career, my honor, my life, all of it means nothing compared to having you back. But I can't protect what I don't understand." Thunder rolled overhead, and rain began to drip through the ceiling gaps. Elena pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around Thomas, her movements careful and practiced. She'd been protecting this child for 3 years, Marcus realized. 3 years of hiding, running, living in fear. "The night we supposedly died," she began, her voice barely audible above the storm, "soldiers came to our house. Not bandits, soldiers wearing the king's colors but with their faces covered. They had orders to kill us all." Marcus felt ice form in his veins. "That's impossible. King Aldrich would never—" "I saw the sealed orders, Marcus. I saw the royal crest." Elena's eyes met his, and he saw the terrible truth there. "Someone warned me moments before they arrived. I escaped through the root cellar with the children while you were away on patrol. The bodies they showed you. They belonged to a woman and 2 children from the plague district, similar enough in age and size to pass for us after the fire." The world seemed to tilt around Marcus. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd mourned, had been built on lies. But worse than that, his king, the man he'd sworn to serve unto death, had ordered the murder of innocent children. Why? The word came out strangled. What could possibly justify such an act? Elena hesitated, glancing again at their children. When she spoke, her words were weighted with years of fear and careful silence. "Thomas isn't your son, Marcus. And because of who his father truly is, his very existence threatens the legitimacy of the throne." The confession hit him like a physical blow. Marcus stared down at the sleeping boy, this child he'd cradled as an infant, taught to walk, loved without question. Thomas bore no resemblance to him, Marcus realized with dawning horror. The boy's features were finer, more aristocratic. His hair held golden highlights that belonged to neither Marcus nor Elena. Whose son is he? But even as he asked, pieces were falling into place. Elena's sudden elevation to lady-in-waiting to the queen, the unexplained gifts that had appeared in their modest home, the way certain nobles had looked at her during court functions. "The prince," Elena whispered, and the words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Prince Roderick is Thomas's father, and if that truth ever came to light—" Marcus closed his eyes, understanding flooding through him like poison. A bastard prince could rally support, could challenge the succession, could tear the kingdom apart in civil war. King Aldrich wouldn't just want Thomas dead, he'd want every trace of the boy's existence erased from history. They weren't just running from execution, they were carrying a secret that kingdoms would burn to possess or destroy. The royal chambers felt suffocating as Marcus paced before the ornate windows, his armor clanking with each restless step. 3 days had passed since he'd discovered Ilara and the children, 3 days of stolen moments and whispered conversations that had shattered everything he thought he knew about his life. Now, summoning his courage, he'd requested an audience with King Aldrich, though he hadn't yet decided what truths he would reveal. "You seem troubled, my faithful captain," King Aldrich observed from his throne, his weathered face creased with what appeared to be genuine concern. The monarch had always treated Marcus more as a trusted advisor than a mere soldier, which made the weight of Ilara's secret all the more crushing. "My lord," Marcus began, his voice carefully measured, "I've discovered something that requires your wisdom." The king leaned forward, his steel-grey eyes sharpening. "Speak freely." Marcus felt the words catch in his throat. How could he explain that the woman he'd mourned for 5 years had been alive all along, hiding in the shadow of the very palace he protected? How could he admit that his children, the crown prince's own blood relatives, had been living as beggars while he served the man who had supposedly ordered their deaths? "I've encountered rumors," Marcus said finally, choosing his words like a man walking through a minefield. "Whispers about survivors from the Thornwick massacre, people who might have escaped the flames." King Aldrich's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Thornwick," the king repeated slowly. "That was a dark chapter indeed. The rebels who perished there got what they deserved for their treason. And their families?" Marcus pressed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Necessary casualties," Aldrich replied with practiced coldness. "Revolution is a disease, Captain. It spreads through bloodlines if left unchecked. Surely you understand this. You lost your own wife and children to rebel violence that same year." The irony was bitter as poison on Marcus's tongue. He nodded slowly, studying the king's face for any hint of deception, any crack in the royal facade that might reveal whether Ilara's accusations held truth. "Of course, my lord. I simply worry that if any survivors remain hidden, they might pose a future threat." King Aldrich rose from his throne and walked to the window, gazing out at the courtyard where Marcus knew his children were likely still playing in the hidden alcove Ilara had shown them. The sight of the king so close to his family, unaware of their presence, sent ice through Marcus's veins. "You've served me faithfully for 15 years, Aldrich said without turning around. "Your loyalty has never wavered, even in your grief. That kind of devotion is rare, Marcus. It's why I trust you above all others." The words felt like daggers. Marcus had built his identity around that loyalty, had clung to his service to the crown as his only purpose after losing everything. But if Ilara spoke truly, if this man had orchestrated the very tragedy that had destroyed his world, then everything Marcus believed about honor and duty crumbled to ash. "Your Majesty," Marcus ventured, his voice barely steady, "what if one of your most trusted servants discovered they had been misled about something important, something that challenged their understanding of past events?" The king turned slowly, his gaze piercing. For a long moment the two men stared at each other across the opulent chamber, and Marcus felt as though the king could see straight through to his racing thoughts. "Hypothetically speaking?" Aldrich asked. "Yes, my lord. I would remind such a servant that perspective can be a treacherous thing, that truth often has many faces, and that loyalty, true loyalty, sometimes requires accepting difficult realities." The king's voice carried a subtle warning that made Marcus's skin crawl. "I would also remind him that the stability of the realm depends on certain understandings remaining undisturbed." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Marcus bowed deeply, not trusting his expression to remain neutral. "Of course, Your Majesty. Stability above all." "Good man," Aldrich said, settling back onto his throne. "Now, was there anything else troubling you?" Marcus straightened, his decision crystallizing like ice in his chest. He couldn't confront the king directly, not yet, not without proof, and not while Ilara and the children remained vulnerable. But he also couldn't continue this charade of ignorant loyalty. No, my lord. You've given me much to consider. As Marcus turned to leave, the king's voice stopped him at the chamber doors. Marcus, tomorrow we discuss the new security measures for the eastern borders. Your insights will be valuable. I'll be ready, Your Majesty. Walking through the palace corridors, Marcus felt the familiar weight of his sword at his side differently now. The blade he'd drawn countless times in service to the crown might soon be turned against everything he'd sworn to protect. The realization should have filled him with horror. Instead, he felt only grim determination. The abandoned watchtower stood like a broken tooth against the storm-darkened sky, its crumbling stones offering meager shelter from the driving rain. Marcus pressed his back against the cold wall, listening for any sound of pursuit above the howling wind. His sword remained drawn, though his arm trembled from exhaustion rather than fear. Elena sat huddled in the corner with Thomas and little Sarah, her dark cloak pulled tight around them all. The children had finally stopped crying, their small bodies shaking with cold and terror. Marcus had managed to get them out of the palace grounds, but barely. The alarm bells had begun ringing before they'd even reached the outer courtyard. "They'll search every building in the lower city," Elena whispered, her voice hoarse. "Garrett won't stop until he finds us." Marcus sheathed his sword and moved to where his family cowered. In the dim light filtering through the broken roof, Elena looked nothing like the noble lady he'd married 8 years ago. Her face was gaunt, marked by hardship and secrets, but her eyes still held that fierce intelligence that had first captivated him. "Tell me about the bloodline," he said quietly, settling beside her. "Tell me why the king wants you dead badly enough to fake your deaths and hunt you like animals." Elena's jaw tightened. "Some truths are too dangerous to speak, even here. Our children are in danger because of this truth." Marcus reached out and touched Thomas's sleeping face. "I've already broken my oath to the crown. I've already chosen you over duty. Don't make me fight blind." For a long moment, only the storm filled the silence. Then Elena pulled something from beneath her cloak, a small wrapped bundle that she handled with reverence. Her fingers shook as she unwrapped it, revealing an ornate silver medallion that seemed to catch and hold what little light penetrated their shelter. Marcus had seen that symbol before, carved into the oldest stones of the palace foundation, a tree with 7 branches, encircled by ancient runes that predated the current royal house by centuries. "My grandmother was not a seamstress from the eastern provinces," Elena began, her voice barely audible above the wind. "She was Lady Morwyn of House Drakmore, last daughter of the bloodline that ruled this kingdom before King Aldric's grandfather seized the throne." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. House Drakmore, the old kings, the rightful dynasty that had been wiped out in the War of Succession 40 years ago. Every member of that bloodline had supposedly been killed or driven into exile, their very names forbidden to be spoken in the kingdom. "That's impossible," he breathed. Drakmore blood was purged from the realm. Not all of it. Elena's fingers traced the medallion's surface. "My grandmother escaped the massacre disguised as a servant. She hid in the eastern provinces, took a new name, married a common man. But she never forgot who she was, what was stolen from her. She passed that knowledge to my mother, who passed it to me." Marcus stared at his wife, seeing her with new eyes. "You're not just nobility, you're royalty. True royalty. By blood, yes. By right of succession under the old laws, Thomas would be—" She glanced at their sleeping son. "He would be the rightful heir to the throne." The implications crashed over Marcus like a tide. This wasn't just about Elena's noble heritage or some minor political inconvenience for the crown. This was about legitimacy, about the very foundation of King Aldric's rule. If word spread that true Drakmore blood still flowed, that a male heir lived and breathed in the kingdom's own capital, "Garrett knows," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "He's always known. My grandmother made the mistake of trusting him when he was just a young knight. She thought She thought he might be sympathetic to our cause, that he remembered the old ways with fondness. Elena's laugh was bitter. Instead, he went straight to the king. But Aldrich was clever. Rather than create a martyr by executing me publicly, he staged our deaths and had us thrown into the streets to die slowly of hunger and disease. But you survived. Barely. And only because there are still those in this kingdom who remember the old oaths, who believe the true bloodline should rule. She rewrapped the medallion carefully. They've been helping us, hiding us, keeping us alive, waiting for what? Elena's eyes met his, and in them he saw not the desperate fugitive of moments before, but something regal and determined, for the right moment to reclaim what was stolen from us, for the day when we're strong enough to challenge the usurper's crown. Thunder crashed overhead, and in the distance Marcus could hear the sound of horses and shouting voices. The search was expanding outward from the palace. They had perhaps an hour before the hunters reached this part of the city. His wife was not just a secret worth killing for, she was a revolution waiting to happen. The abandoned watchtower stood like a broken tooth against the storm-darkened sky, its stone walls slick with rain that had begun falling at dusk. Marcus pulled his cloak tighter as he climbed the crumbling stairs, each step echoing his mounting dread. Elena had insisted they meet here, away from the city's eyes, away from the palace's reach. The urgency in her voice when she'd whispered the location still rang in his ears. She was waiting at the top, silhouetted against the narrow window that faced the capital. The children huddled behind her, Thomas clutching a threadbare blanket, while little Sarah pressed against her mother's side. In the dim light, they looked more like phantoms than the family he'd mourned for 3 years. "You came," Elena said, turning toward him. Her face bore new lines of worry, and something else, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "You're my wife. Of course I came." Marcus stepped closer, noting how she tensed at his approach. "Elena, what's happening? Why did you disappear from the inn? The soldiers found blood, not my blood." Her voice carried a weight that made his stomach clench. "Marcus, sit down, please." He remained standing, Captain's instincts prickling. "What aren't you telling me?" Elena's laugh held no humor. She moved to the window, gazing out at the palace towers that pierced the night sky. "Everything. I've told you nothing that matters." She turned back to him, and in the lightning's brief illumination, her eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. "Do you remember the plague that swept through Aldermere? The one that killed our neighbors' children, that took half the village?" "Of course. It's why I brought you and the children to the capital, to keep you safe." The memory still haunted him. Bodies wrapped in white cloth, the smell of burning herbs that couldn't mask the stench of death. "The plague didn't kill us, Marcus. We were never sick." Elena's hands began to shake, and she clasped them behind her back. "The plague revealed us." The words hung in the air like a curse. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "Revealed what?" Thomas whimpered, and Elena shot him a sharp look that silenced the boy immediately. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "We didn't age during those 3 years you thought us dead. Thomas is still 7, Sarah still 4. I haven't aged a day since the plague touched our village and awakened something in our blood that should have stayed sleeping." Marcus stared at his children, really looked at them for the first time since their reunion. Thomas had always been small for his age, but now that Elena mentioned it, the boy's face held the same round innocence it had 3 years ago. Sarah sucked her thumb with the same habit she'd developed as a toddler, unchanged, unaged. "That's impossible," he breathed, but even as he said it, pieces began clicking together. Elena's unchanged beauty, the children's familiar mannerisms, the way other beggars seemed to avoid them in the streets. The royal bloodline carries old magic, Marcus. Magic that's been diluted over generations, sleeping in bastard children and forgotten branches of the family tree. King Aldrich knows this. It's why he orders the culling of anyone who shows signs of awakening. Elena's voice grew bitter. "My grandmother was born on the wrong side of the blanket to Prince Garrett. That tainted blood runs in my veins, and now in our children's." The thunder crashed overhead, and Marcus flinched as if struck. "You're telling me you're—" "Royal bastards, immortals, everything the king fears." Elena stepped toward him, her composure cracking. "The plague was meant to kill us, Marcus. It was laced with iron dust, blessed by the court mages to poison any with dormant royal blood. But instead of dying, we changed." Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. Not from threat, but from habit, from the weight of his oath pressing down on him like a physical force. "Elena, do you understand what you're telling me?" "I'm telling you why we can never go back to the life we had. Why I let you believe we were dead rather than bring this curse down on your head." She reached for him, her fingers brushing his cheek. "I'm telling you why you have to choose." "Choose what?" "The king will know eventually. His mages can sense awakened blood if they look hard enough. They'll come for us, and when they do—" She glanced at the children, who watched their parents with wide, frightened eyes. "You'll have to decide whether you're Captain Marcus, sworn protector of the crown, or just Marcus, father and husband to traitors." Lightning split the sky again, and in its harsh light, Marcus saw his future fracturing into impossible paths. Behind Elena, the palace gleamed like a beacon, calling him back to duty, to honor, to everything he'd built his life upon. But in front of him stood his family, his impossible, dangerous, beloved family, waiting for an answer that would damn them all. The underground chamber fell silent except for the steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone wall, his heart hammering as footsteps echoed from the tunnel they'd just escaped. Elena's hand found his in the shadows, her fingers trembling but her grip fierce. "They know we're here," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. The children huddled behind them, Lily's soft whimpering barely audible above the approaching sounds of pursuit. Marcus drew his sword slowly, the metal singing softly as it cleared the scabbard. 3 days had passed since they'd fled the safe house, 3 days of running through the city's forgotten passages while the king's guard hunted them like animals. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd once led those very men, trained them, trusted them with his life. "There's another way," Elena said, pointing deeper into the chamber. Ancient symbols carved into the walls seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. She'd been leading them through these tunnels with uncertainty that unnerved him, as if she'd walked these paths 100 times before. "How do you know about this place?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Elena's eyes met his in the dim light. "Because this is where it all began, where they first brought me after—" She paused, touching the pendant at her throat, the one that had started glowing brighter with each passing hour. "After they discovered what I could do." The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by the flicker of torches. Marcus counted at least 6 men, maybe more. Captain Aldrich's voice carried through the stone corridors, sharp and commanding. His former lieutenant had always been thorough. "Papa," Thomas whispered, tugging at Marcus's cloak. The boy's face was pale but determined, so much like Marcus himself at that age. "The symbols on the walls, they're moving." Marcus looked where his son pointed and felt his blood chill. The carved runes were indeed shifting, flowing like liquid across the stone surface. Elena stepped forward, raising her hand toward the nearest wall. "Don't." Marcus caught her wrist. "Whatever this place is, whatever power it holds—" "It's the only way to protect them," Elena said, nodding toward their children. "The only way to protect the kingdom. You still don't understand what we're truly facing, do you?" Before Marcus could respond, Elena pressed her palm against the glowing symbols. The chamber erupted in brilliant light, and suddenly Marcus could see the true scope of the room they'd stumbled into. It was vast, far larger than any natural cave, with soaring arches and intricate murals covering every surface. And in the center, raised on a dais of black stone, sat an ornate throne carved from what looked like solidified starlight. "The seat of binding," Elena breathed. "I thought it was destroyed centuries ago." "What is this place?" Marcus demanded. But Elena was already moving toward the throne, drawn as if by an invisible rope. The pursuing footsteps had stopped. In the sudden silence, Marcus heard Aldrich's voice, tight with fear. "Sir, the men won't go any further. They say the very air feels cursed." Elena climbed the steps to the throne, her pendant now blazing like a captured star. "This is where the first compact was made, Marcus, where the royal bloodline bound itself to powers beyond mortal understanding. But the binding works both ways. It can be unmade." "Mother, no!" Lily cried out, seeming to sense something the adults had missed. "The shadows are angry." Marcus spun around and saw them, tendrils of living darkness seeping from the walls, reaching toward Elena with hungry purpose. Whatever force had created this place, it didn't want to give up its hold easily. "Elena, get away from there." But even as he spoke, Marcus realized she wasn't being controlled by the throne's power. She was controlling it. The pendant around her neck pulsed in rhythm with the carved symbols, and the approaching shadows recoiled from its light. "I'm sorry," Elena said, her voice echoing strangely in the vast chamber. "I should have told you everything from the beginning, but some truths are too dangerous for the innocent to bear." She sat down on the throne, and the entire chamber shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling as ancient mechanisms awakened. Through the tunnels behind them, Marcus heard Aldrich's men crying out in alarm, their torches guttering in a wind that had no earthly source. "The compact that made King Roderick's ancestors powerful," Elena continued, her form beginning to shimmer with ethereal light, "it came at a price. The kingdom has been feeding on borrowed time, borrowed power for 300 years, and now the debt has come due." Marcus reached for her, but Thomas caught his arm. "Papa, look!" Beyond the throne, the chamber's far wall had become transparent, revealing a view of the city above. And in that view, Marcus saw something that made his warrior's heart quail, a massive shadow falling across the palace, blotting out the sun itself. The abandoned tower reeked of decay and forgotten magic. Marcus pressed his back against the crumbling stone wall, listening to the sounds of pursuit echoing through the corridors below. His armor had been discarded hours ago, leaving him in simple clothes that wouldn't catch the torchlight. Beside him, Elena clutched their sleeping daughter while young Thomas peered through a gap in the wall, watching for guards. "They're moving away from this section," Thomas whispered, his voice carrying the forced calm of someone too young to bear such burdens. Elena's fingers traced protective symbols in the air, her magic barely visible in the moonlight streaming through broken windows. The spell would mask their scent from the tracking hounds, but it was weakening her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled with exhaustion. "How long can you maintain the concealment?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Not much longer." Elena's voice was barely audible. "The kingdom's magic fights against mine. It recognizes what I am, what she was." The words hung between them like a blade. 3 days had passed since Elena revealed the truth about her bloodline, about the ancient power flowing through her veins that marked her as heir to the throne King Aldrich had usurped 20 years ago. 3 days since their world had shattered completely. Marcus reached for her hand, feeling the unnatural warmth that pulsed beneath her skin. "There has to be another way. We could flee the kingdom, start over somewhere. With what army pursuing us?" Elena's laugh held no humor. "Aldrich won't stop hunting until we're all dead. He can't afford to let me live, not when the nobles are already questioning his legitimacy." Through the broken window, the capital city sprawled below them like a wounded beast. Fires burned in 3 districts where riots had erupted after word spread of the true heir's return. The people's desperation had found focus, and they were tearing apart everything in their path. Thomas moved away from his watching post, settling beside his parents. "The rebels found us again. I can see their signals from the East Tower." Marcus felt his stomach clench. The rebel faction that had discovered Elena's identity 3 days ago had been relentless in their pursuit. They didn't want to harm her. They wanted to use her, to parade her before the people as their rightful queen and fan the flames of revolution. But Elena had refused to be anyone's puppet, choosing instead to flee with her family. They think I'll be their salvation, Elena said, as if reading his thoughts. They don't understand that my magic comes with a price. Every spell I cast to protect us brings me closer to the madness that consumed my ancestors. Marcus remembered the stories now, fragments of history he'd dismissed as legend. The old royal line had been powerful, yes, but their magic demanded balance. Great power required great sacrifice, and too often that sacrifice was sanity itself. Elena's grandmother had ruled for 3 years before the magic drove her to burn half the capital. Her great-uncle had commanded the very stones to rise against his enemies before turning that same power against his own family. "You're not them," Marcus said firmly. "Aren't I?" Elena's eyes blazed with inner fire. "Today I made the earth swallow 6 of Aldrich's soldiers. Yesterday I called lightning to strike down the men pursuing Thomas. How long before I can't control it? How long before I become the monster they say I am?" Their daughter stirred in Elena's arms, murmuring softly. The child's presence seemed to calm the wild energy surrounding her mother, and Elena's expression softened. "There might be another choice," Thomas said quietly. "The rebels aren't the only ones who found us today." Marcus turned sharply. "What do you mean? One of your old company came to the lower level." "Captain Blackwood," he left a message. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. James Blackwood had served beside him for 15 years, a man whose loyalty ran deeper than duty. If James had risked coming here, it meant something significant. "He says King Aldrich is dying," Thomas continued. "Some kind of wasting sickness. The court physicians give him days, maybe weeks. And Prince Garrett—" The boy hesitated. "What about Garrett?" Elena asked. "He's been meeting with the rebel leaders in secret. Blackwood thinks he might be willing to negotiate a peaceful transition." The implications crashed over Marcus like a wave. Prince Garrett had always been different from his father, more thoughtful, less consumed by paranoia. If he was truly considering abdication in favor of Elena's claim, it could mean an end to the bloodshed. But it could also be a trap. "We need proof," Marcus said. "Something more than whispered promises and secret meetings." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her magic stirring the dust motes in the moonlight. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of terrible decision. "Then we give them a demonstration. Tomorrow night, when the moon is dark, I'll show them exactly what the old blood can do." The ancient stones beneath the temple seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as Elara pressed her palm against the altar. Marcus watched in horror as black veins spread up her arm like poisonous ivy, and her eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. "Elara!" He lunged forward, but Theron's iron grip held him back. "Don't touch her," the old priest warned. "The communion has begun. Interruption now could kill her." Around them, the temple walls began to weep, not water, but something dark and viscous that reeked of decay. The shadow realm was bleeding through, responding to Elara's call. Marcus felt his sword grow cold at his hip, the blessed steel reacting to the unholy presence filling the sacred space. Elara's body convulsed, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made Marcus's teeth ache. "The devourer stirs. The barriers weaken. Soon the feast of souls begins." "Ask about the binding," Theron urged, his weathered face pale with strain. "How do we strengthen the seals?" But Elara was lost in the vision now, her consciousness pulled into realms where mortal minds weren't meant to venture. She spoke in fragments, her words painting pictures of apocalyptic horror. Cities burn, the dead rise to serve, children's laughter becomes screaming. Her back arched impossibly as another wave of dark energy coursed through her. The crown is the key. Blood of the betrayer must water the stone." Marcus felt ice form in his veins. The crown, King Aldrich's crown, worn now in the throne room mere miles above them, and blood of the betrayer. He thought of the journal entries they'd found, of the first king's desperate bargain with forces beyond comprehension. "Elara, come back to us," he called, fighting against Theron's restraining hand. "You've given us enough." But she was deeper now, her voice becoming something else entirely. "Marcus, my beloved Marcus." The words were tender, but spoken in tones that belonged to no earthly throat. You cannot save us all. Choose who lives and who feeds the darkness." The temperature in the chamber plummeted. Their breath came out in white puffs as frost formed on the ancient stones. Marcus could see shapes moving in the shadows at the edge of his vision, things with too many teeth and eyes like dying stars. "The ritual approaches," Elara continued, her body now rigid as stone. 3 days hence, when the moon bleeds red, the king will call forth the devourer, believing he commands it. But it commands him. It has always commanded him. "How do we stop it?" Marcus shouted over the rising wind that seemed to blow from nowhere and everywhere at once. Elara turned her head toward him with movements too fluid for human joints. "Destroy the anchor, shatter the crown, let the city burn, but save the realm. There has to be another way." "There is." Her smile was beautiful and terrible. "Take my place, accept the mark willingly, become the vessel, and perhaps you can resist long enough for others to act." No, the word tore from Marcus's throat like a physical thing. He'd found her again, found their children. He wouldn't lose them to some cosmic horror, wouldn't abandon them to save strangers. "The children?" Elara's voice grew faint, as if she were speaking from a great distance. "They carry the bloodline too. If you fall, they can... Enough!" Marcus broke free from Theron's grip and grabbed Elara's shoulders, heedless of the dark energy crackling around her. "Come back to me!" The contact sent agony shooting through his body like liquid fire. He felt the shadow realm's attention focus on him, vast and hungry and patient. For a moment, he stood at the edge of an abyss filled with writhing darkness, and something enormous looked back at him with interest. Then Elara gasped, her eyes snapping back to normal, and the temperature began to rise. The weeping walls dried and the shadows retreated to their proper corners, but the knowledge remained, burning in their minds like a brand. "Did you see?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and human again. "Did you see what's coming?" Marcus nodded grimly. 3 days. King Aldrich thinks he's summoning a weapon, but he's opening a door. Theron helped Elara to her feet, his movements gentle despite the urgency of their situation. The prophecies speak of this moment, the final convergence, when the devourer seeks to break free entirely. "Then we stop him," Marcus said, though even as he spoke the words, he felt their inadequacy. How did 3 people, one of them a priest too old for battle, another a woman carrying a curse that could destroy her, stand against a king and the cosmic horror he served? But looking at Elara, seeing the determination blazing in her eyes despite the exhaustion of her ordeal, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. She'd walked into the shadow realm and returned with the knowledge they needed. If she could do that, perhaps together they could do the impossible. They had 3 days to save the kingdom, 3 days to prevent the end of everything. The throne room had never felt so suffocating. Marcus stood at attention before King Aldrich, his armor weighing heavier with each passing moment. The monarch's pale eyes bore into him, searching for cracks in his composure that Marcus couldn't afford to show. "You've been distracted lately, Captain," the king observed, his fingers drumming against the gilded armrest of his throne. "Lady Blackthorn mentioned seeing you in the lower districts. Unusual territory for the captain of the Royal Guard." Marcus kept his expression neutral, despite the ice forming in his veins. "I conduct regular patrols throughout the city, Your Majesty. It's my duty to ensure the crown's safety at every level." "Indeed." Aldrich's smile was razor-thin. "And what did you discover in these thorough investigations?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Marcus knew that Lady Blackthorn had seen him with Elena and the children 3 days ago. He'd been careless, allowing emotion to override caution when he'd embraced his son in the alley. Now he faced the consequences of that moment of weakness. "Nothing that threatens the crown, Your Majesty." "Fascinating." The king rose from his throne, his burgundy robes rustling. "Because I've heard whispers of a woman in the slums who bears a striking resemblance to someone from your past. Someone who should be quite thoroughly dead." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, but years of military discipline held him steady. "The dead cannot return, Your Majesty." "No, they cannot. Aldrich descended the steps slowly, deliberately, which makes me wonder what manner of deception has been playing out under my very nose. Tell me, Marcus, do you still dream of your family? The personal nature of the question struck like a physical blow. Marcus had served this man for 5 years, had sworn sacred oaths, had believed in the righteousness of his cause. But now, seeing the calculating coldness in those pale eyes, he wondered how he'd ever mistaken manipulation for leadership. "I serve the crown above all else," Marcus replied, the words tasting like ash. "Of course you do." Aldrich stopped mere inches away, close enough that Marcus could smell the wine on his breath, which is why you'll understand the necessity of what comes next. There are forces moving against us, Marcus, dangerous elements that would see our kingdom torn asunder. I need to know that my most trusted servant's loyalties remain undivided. A commotion erupted outside the throne room doors. Shouts echoed through the corridors, followed by the heavy footsteps of guards. Marcus tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his sword hilt. The massive oak doors burst open. Sir Garrett, Marcus's second-in-command, strode in with barely contained urgency. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but we have a situation. The prisoner in the East Tower has escaped." Marcus's blood turned to ice. The East Tower housed only one prisoner, Lord Hartwell, the nobleman Elena had been secretly meeting. The man who held pieces of her dangerous truth. "Escaped?" Aldrich's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "How is that possible?" "Unknown, Your Majesty. But there's more." Garrett's eyes flicked nervously to Marcus. "We found evidence in his cell. Documents, letters. They implicate certain members of the court in treasonous activities." The king's gaze snapped back to Marcus with predatory intensity. "What sort of treasonous activities?" "Correspondence regarding the legitimacy of the royal bloodline, claims about Prince William's true parentage." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt the walls closing in around him, understanding with crystal clarity that Elena's secret was about to destroy everything. She'd been protecting information about the prince's birth, about the lies that had built this kingdom's foundation. "Bring me these documents," Aldrich commanded, his voice barely controlled. "And double the guard. I want every entrance to the palace sealed. No one enters or leaves without my personal authorization." As Garrett hurried away, the king turned back to Marcus with renewed focus. "It seems we have rats in our midst, Captain. Rats who think they can undermine everything I've built." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I want you to find Lord Hartwell, and when you do, I want him silenced permanently, along with anyone who might have aided his escape." Marcus nodded stiffly, knowing that Elena and the children were in immediate danger. If Hartwell reached them first, if he revealed their location to save himself, the king would show no mercy. "You have until dawn," Aldrich continued. "Fail me in this, and I'll begin questioning your fitness for command. I trust I make myself clear." "Perfectly, Your Majesty." As Marcus turned to leave, the king's final words followed him like a curse. "Remember, Captain, loyalty is not just about serving the crown. It's about ensuring that no one can threaten what we've sworn to protect, even if that means making difficult choices about the past." The throne room doors closed behind Marcus with the finality of a tomb sealing. He had perhaps 6 hours before dawn, 6 hours to find Elena and the children before the king's suspicions crystallized into action. The choice he'd been dreading was no longer theoretical. It was racing toward him like an avalanche, and there would be no escaping its consequences. The throne room fell silent as Eleanor stepped forward, the crystalline pendant at her throat pulsing with ethereal light. King Aldrich's face had drained of all color, his weathered hands gripping the armrests of his golden throne until his knuckles turned white. "You recognize it, don't you?" Eleanor's voice carried across the vast chamber, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The heart of Valdris, the same stone your father used to bind the realm's magic to his bloodline." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The pendant, he'd seen it before, years ago, when Eleanor would sometimes touch her throat in that absent way she had when deep in thought. He'd assumed it was simply jewelry, a family heirloom of little consequence. How wrong he'd been. Impossible, Aldrich whispered, but his eyes betrayed him. Fear flickered there, ancient and primal. That stone was destroyed when the old kingdom fell. Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your father told you many lies, it seems. The heart wasn't destroyed, it was stolen. By my grandmother, who served as court mage, until she discovered what your bloodline truly intended for this realm. The courtiers began to murmur among themselves, confusion and alarm spreading through their ranks like wildfire. Marcus noticed how several of the king's guards shifted nervously, their hands moving to their sword hilts. 25 years ago, Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, your father ordered the massacre of my village, not because we were rebels or traitors, but because we were descendants of the original mage line, because our very existence threatened his monopoly on power. King Aldrich rose from his throne, his ceremonial sword singing as he drew it from its sheath. Enough of these fabrications! Guards, arrest this woman for treason and— The pendant blazed with sudden brilliance, and the king's sword shattered in his grip. The fragments clattered to the marble floor as gasps echoed throughout the chamber. Eleanor hadn't moved, hadn't even raised her hands, but power radiated from her in waves that made the air itself shimmer. The magic was never yours by right, she said, taking another step forward. It belonged to the realm, to all its people. Your bloodline merely learned to steal it and hoard it. Marcus watched in stunned fascination as his wife, the woman he'd thought he knew completely, commanded forces beyond his comprehension. But beneath his awe, a cold realization crept in. If Eleanor possessed such power, if she was truly the rightful heir to the realm's magical legacy, then everything he'd believed about the kingdom, about his own purpose, was built on lies. Mother, came a small voice from beside him. Lyra stepped forward, her young face set with determination that mirrored her mother's. Tell them about the children. Eleanor's expression softened as she looked at her daughter. Yes. Tell me, Your Majesty, do you know why so many children have been falling ill this past year? Why the harvests have been failing in the outer provinces? Aldrich's face had gone from pale to ashen. He stumbled backward until he hit his throne, then sank into it as if his legs could no longer support his weight. The magic is dying, Eleanor said simply. Your bloodline has held it so tightly, used it so selfishly, that it's slowly strangling itself. Without the balance that the mage line once provided, the kingdom's very life force is withering away. Marcus felt Thomas move closer to his side. His son's hand slipped into his, small fingers intertwining with his own. The boy looked up at him with eyes that held far too much understanding for his age. We've been helping where we can, Thomas said quietly. His words meant only for Marcus, but somehow carrying in the sudden hush. Mother taught us to hide our gifts, but we couldn't just let people suffer. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The mysterious recoveries in the city's poorest districts, the wells that had inexplicably begun flowing again after years of drought, the children who'd recovered from wasting sickness when the court physicians had given up hope. His family, his supposedly powerless, helpless family, had been working magic under the very nose of the crown. King Aldrich's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely a whisper. What do you want? Eleanor's hand closed around the pendant, and its light dimmed to a soft glow. I want what my grandmother died trying to achieve. A restoration of balance. Magic returned to its rightful place as a gift for all people, not a weapon for one family's ambition. And if I refuse— The smile that crossed Eleanor's face was sad but resolute. Then you'll watch your kingdom crumble into dust, taking everyone you claim to rule with it. The choice, Your Majesty, is yours. Marcus squeezed Thomas's hand and felt his son squeeze back. Whatever came next, whatever choice the king made, there would be no going back to the life they'd known before. The throne room erupted in chaos as Elena stepped forward, her hand raised, arcane energy crackling between her fingers like captured lightning. The assembled nobles gasped and scrambled backward, their silk gowns rustling against marble as they pressed themselves against the walls. "You dare bring sorcery into my presence?" King Aldrich roared, his face flushing crimson beneath his golden crown. "Guards, seize the witch!" But the royal guards hesitated, their weapons trembling in their hands as they witnessed the raw power emanating from Elena's slight frame. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched his wife, his supposedly powerless, gentle wife, command forces he could barely comprehend. "Your Majesty," Elena's voice carried across the vast chamber with supernatural clarity, "you will listen to what I have to say, or this kingdom will burn before dawn." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus saw several courtiers cross themselves, whispering prayers under their breath. He had sworn an oath to protect this crown, this kingdom, yet here stood the woman he loved more than life itself, wielding the very forces the realm had been taught to fear. 20 years ago," Elena continued, her eyes never leaving the king's face, "you ordered the massacre at Thornwick village. Every man, woman, and child who carried the old blood. My blood." King Aldrich's expression shifted from rage to something closer to fear. "That village fell to plague. Everyone knows. Everyone knows the lie you told." Elena's power flared brighter, and the great chandeliers above began to sway despite the absence of any wind. "I was there, Aldrich. I watched your soldiers put my people to the sword. I watched them burn the bodies to hide the evidence." Marcus felt the world tilting beneath his feet. All these years, Elena had never spoken of her past before their marriage. He had assumed she was simply a merchant's daughter from a distant province. The weight of her deception crashed over him like a cold wave. "You survived," the king whispered, and Marcus could hear the terrible recognition in his voice. "The soothsayers said all the bloodline had been purged. All but one." Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. One frightened girl who crawled from beneath the corpses of her family and fled into the wilderness. One survivor who learned to hide her gift, to live among those who would kill her if they knew what she truly was. The king's hand moved toward the ceremonial sword at his side, but Elena gestured dismissively. The weapon flew from its sheath and embedded itself in a marble pillar 20 feet away. "I could have killed you 100 times over these past years," she said conversationally. "Your food taster? One of my people. The stable master who tends your favorite horse? He carries the blood. The seamstress who repairs your royal banners?" Elena's laugh was cold music. "We have been here all along, Aldrich. Watching, waiting." Marcus found his voice at last. "Elena, what are you doing?" She turned to him, and for a moment her expression softened. "What I should have done long ago, my love. What I was too afraid to do because I thought I could protect our children by staying hidden." "Your children," King Aldrich said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They carry the bloodline." "They do." Elena's power pulsed again, and cracks appeared in the marble floor beneath the throne. "And today you tried to have them killed along with me. That was your mistake, Aldrich. I could forgive the past, the murder of my people, the lies, the years of living in fear, but you threatened my children." The great doors of the throne room burst open, and Marcus spun to see figures in dark cloaks filing in. Men and women of all ages, their eyes glowing with the same eldritch light that surrounded his wife. The hidden survivors, he realized, the bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. "You have a choice now, Your Majesty," Elena said, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Abdicate your throne and confess your crimes to the people, or face the consequences of 2 decades of injustice." King Aldrich looked around desperately at his guards, but they were backing away, unwilling to face the assembled power before them. "You cannot do this. The other kingdoms will never accept a sorceress on the throne. There will be war." "There will be war regardless," Elena replied. "The only question is whether you meet your end with some shred of honor intact, or whether I drag the truth from your dying lips as your castle burns around us." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between his wife and the king he had served faithfully for 15 years. Both of his loyalties, both of his loves, stood on opposite sides of a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. "Elena," he said quietly, "there has to be another way." She looked at him with infinite sadness. "There was, Marcus, but that way died the moment he sent assassins after our children." The throne room had never felt so vast or so small. Marcus stood before King Aldric, the weight of 17 chapters of anguish and discovery pressing down upon his shoulders like iron chains. Behind him, Elena waited in the shadows with their children, her secret finally laid bare. She was the lost heir to the Shadowlands, the key to a power that could either save or destroy everything they knew. "You have served me faithfully for 12 years, the king said, his voice echoing off the marble columns. "Tell me, Captain, what would you have me do with this revelation?" Marcus felt Elena's presence like a flame at his back. Their son Tam clutched at her worn skirts, while little Mira peered around her mother's legs with wide, curious eyes that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, the same light that had first revealed Elena's true nature when the assassins came for them in the night. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, then stopped. How could he explain that the woman he'd mourned for 5 years possessed the bloodline that every neighboring kingdom sought to either crown or destroy? How could he make the king understand that love had blinded him to signs that now seemed obvious? Elena's uncanny ability to heal, the way shadows bent toward her, the reason their enemies had burned their home and supposedly killed his family? "She never wanted the power," Marcus said finally. "She chose exile over war. She chose to let the world believe she was dead, rather than claim a throne built on ancient magic." King Aldric descended the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. "And yet here she stands in my court, very much alive, very much a threat to the delicate peace I have maintained." "Or an opportunity," Elena spoke for the first time, stepping from the shadows. Even in her beggar's rags, even after years of hiding, she carried herself with an unmistakable nobility. "The Shadowlands have been without a ruler for too long. The dark creatures of my realm grow restless without direction. They mass at your borders not out of malice, but out of confusion." The king's hand rested on his sword hilt. "You would have me trust the word of one who has deceived us all for so long?" Marcus moved instinctively between them. "She deceived no one, Your Majesty. When the Shadowlands fell, she was a child fleeing for her life. When we met, she was simply Elena, a healer who wanted nothing more than a quiet life. She never sought to deceive, she sought to survive. And when did you learn the truth, Captain?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Marcus could lie, could claim ignorance until this moment, but he had spent too many years living with half-truths and buried pain. 3 days ago, he admitted. "When I found them alive, when the assassins came again, her power manifested to protect our children, but I chose my family over my oath to report immediately to you." "Treason," the king said quietly. "Love," Marcus countered. A long silence stretched between them. In it, Marcus heard the whispered breathing of his children, felt the steady pulse of Elena's magic like a second heartbeat. He thought of the choice that had brought him here, duty to crown or devotion to family. He had already made his decision in the moment he'd swept Tam and Mira into his arms. Everything else was simply consequence. "The northern kingdoms gather armies," King Aldric said at length. "They know somehow that the Shadowland heir lives. If I harbor you, they will see it as an act of war. If I surrender you, they will fight over your power like wolves over meat." "Then let me return," Elena said. "Let me claim what is mine by right and restore order to my realm. An alliance between our kingdoms, not subjugation." Marcus turned to stare at his wife. They had never spoken of this possibility, that she might embrace rather than flee from her heritage. "You would take the throne?" he asked. She met his eyes, and in them he saw not the frightened girl who had hidden from destiny, but a woman who had learned that sometimes running only delayed the inevitable. "I would rather rule my power than have it rule me, and I would rather face this choice with my family beside me than let our children live forever as fugitives." King Aldric studied them all, the captain whose loyalty had been tested beyond breaking, the lost queen who had found her courage, the children who represented a bridge between two worlds. "Very well," he said finally. "But understand this. I am betting my kingdom on your word, Lady Elena of the Shadowlands. If you take that throne and turn your power against us, then Marcus will stop me," Elena said simply. "As he always has. As he always will." Marcus reached for his wife's hand as their children stepped closer, and for the first time in 17 chapters of loss and discovery, he felt the scattered pieces of his world beginning to align.